Hello, and welcome back to the Hopelessly Gifted podcast. I'm your host, Mark Talaga. All right, guys, today we are going to do a little bit of a shorter episode where we're going to answer a listener question. My hope ultimately is that you all feel free enough to head over to hopelesslygifted.com, scroll down to the little window where it says ask a question and submit it to us, because I'd love to do more of these episodes where I answer your questions directly. A lot of times I'm guessing at what would be relevant to you, and you're the one that knows you the best in your situation. So if you have a specific question that you'd like to have answered on the podcast, feel free to send it over. If I get enough of them, I can answer multiples at once, but today we just got one. But I think it's a good one, and I think a lot of parents have a question similar to this. This comes from Stephanie Dyer. The question is, how can parents identify if their child is gifted? And what does giftedness look like at every stage of development? Are there any initial screenings you can do at home to determine if formal testing is right for your child? So I do get this question from time to time, and I always have to back up a little bit when answering it, because I and the people here at the center have very specific, criteria for whether testing is necessary. And the question is, why are you looking for testing? What are you hoping to find, right? For some people out there, they are looking for testing because they want to show that their child is gifted. They want to see how smart their kid is. In these cases, I really don't recommend testing. Testing is not to, put up a banner that says, my child is smart and they're going to be, the savior of the world and fix everything. And for a lot of people, that's not really why they're looking for testing. More often, they're looking for it because there is just some level of misunderstanding with the child's learning. Why are they struggling? Or why are they so capable in one area but not in another? And testing is there to determine, where those gaps might be, why they exist, what's really going on underneath the hood. So when people come into our office, we don't say, oh, you need testing because we're pretty sure your child's gifted. We really only say that when we're trying a lot of things and we say, there's just so much scatter going on in that kid's profile that we can't seem to figure out, what the best method is for supporting them. Or some of the tried and true methods of supporting your gifted child at home and at school just don't seem to be working in the way that we would hope for. We're not seeing progress, fast enough or, with enough change that it's noticeable. And in those cases, we might say, yeah, we need to have this kid tested. And really, it's not like we say, oh, go get tested and then you'll have all your answers. Even after we make that recommendation, we're still guiding people through a process of what to do with the testing, how to interpret it, how to present it to schools or other professionals working with that kid. We also have rules around what you share with your kid and what you don't. We typically say don't show your scores to your kid, especially if they're younger, because they don't have a proper framework for understanding those numbers. They might hang on to numbers and attribute some meaning to it that's inappropriate. Like, oh, see how smart I am? I should be able to do all these things. And, I don't know why I can't. Or more likely, they look at the negative part of it or the lower numbers, the ones where there's vulnerability around it, and say, see, I told you I was dumb, right? And we don't want any of that happening. That's not appropriate. It's not even accurate. But the question being asked is, what am I really looking for? What would tell me that my child is gifted? And I do have some answers for that are a little more straightforward. If we're looking at very young children, even something as young as an infant, right? You can find things like they are hyper observant, right? Those little eyes never seem to close. They're taking in everything. They don't seem to react to much. That can be a sign. And again, none of these are guaranteed signs, so take this all with a grain of salt. But you have children that have sleep issues, even as, again, young as infant age, 6 months, something like that, where, sleep is constantly an issue. One of the things I learned from a very successful neurotester was that, anxiety can be present in an incredibly young age. And what I mean by anxiety is not the typical normative way of viewing it, but what I mean is if you have a really brilliant kid or a kid whose neurophysiology is, has a lot more connections in that little brain of theirs, um, they have a tendency to want to, affect the environment around them, just like all humans do. We want to be able to make changes when we deem them necessary. And for, tiny little babies who can't seem to make that change, they might be a lot more fussy. They might be crying a lot more, screaming a lot more. It might be lasting longer because they just can't seem to get the change that they want to have happen, whether that's they're hungry or they don't like their environment or whatever it may be. As you get a little older into maybe toddler range, you're going to see some pretty epic meltdowns. I mean, extreme meltdowns, not just, kind of crying and screaming because they didn't get their favorite cracker, but more like they are, shaking the walls of your home with their, intensity, right? That level of intensity, that level of emotional development, that level of, again, not being able to have control over the things they want to have control over can be related to giftedness. Or, if you're going down the Dabrowski route of overexcitabilities, you might have emotional overexcitabilities in those cases. And as you get a little older, you might see those tantrums lasting into ages where you don't feel like they're developmentally appropriate. Why is my 9-year-old having a tantrum that would be more appropriate for a 2 or 3-year-old? Again, we're looking at emotional excitabilities. We're looking at their amygdala, their emotional fear center, fight or flight being enlarged, probably, but being a lot more active and intense. And again, the part of the brain that regulates emotional intensity, the prefrontal cortex, where the executive functioning is housed, is just underdeveloped. And so you have just really, really, really extreme intensity coming out of that child. That, again, to me, would be a precursor or a marker that would identify some level of giftedness somewhere. And again, to reiterate, if you're new to the podcast, giftedness is not just intellectual capability. It's not just an ability to be really smart and to do well at school or to, understand concepts at a high level. That is not how we define giftedness. Giftedness is human development that exists in all humans in some form of an extreme. And usually those extreme developments are matched with some level of underdevelopment or some level of normative development compared to their extreme, way off the charts development in some area. And again, that can be physical development, that can be emotional development, that can be, yes, intellectual development, artistic development. It could be a sense of strong moral justice, stronger than other kids may have, a sense of right and wrong that is overdeveloped, right? Or, not overdeveloped, but more like developed faster and more extreme. So these are some of the things you look for. We look for, let's talk about physical and motor development. Sometimes those gaps in the development, a child who struggles to tie their shoes, ride a bike, run, walk, the way they just move in the world, they're bumping into things left and right as a way to regulate themselves on some level. Some of these motor abilities or underdevelopment of motor abilities are a sign of giftedness along the way. Typically, gifted markers are, seen throughout the life. And what I tend to do more than anything is I just tend to trust the parents, and not to be too gendered, but I tend to trust the mom's gut a little bit more. No offense to the dads out there. But typically a parent, one or both, are picking up like, yeah, something's not exactly right. But I've also had parents of only children where they have nothing to compare it to. They only have the one kid. And they still may pick up on like, is this normal? Am I dealing with something that's related to giftedness? What is this, right? And those kind of questions, yes, typically tend to lead you down a route of we need to figure some things out here. What are we really looking at? Is giftedness at play? And again, giftedness is more, is their development just all over the place? I also tend to not have parents worry too much. Is it really getting in the way of their life, their, behaviors, or even these meltdowns? Can they be contained? Can they be managed? Can we understand that it is a child who is just struggling to have some form of control over their environment and they don't know how to do it yet? They don't have the skill. And if we can help them, stay safe and contained and managed and help the child understand what's going on and help the parents understand. No, I don't think we need to run right to the tester to get some sort of diagnosis of, quote unquote, what's wrong. Um, but we are looking for things that just don't fit into the norm. And these quirky behaviors sometimes can be a little upsetting to parents, especially if the parent didn't really feel like they had that experience growing up as a child. Though I tend to find more often than not that somewhere one or both of the parents had a very relatable experience, but maybe just not in such an extreme. Because remember, the biggest thing that I want you to walk away with is all behavior, gifted behavior, extreme behavior, is rooted in typical human development. Your kid is not an alien, though they may seem like it at times. It may seem like they're not from this planet because how they perceive the world and how they react to the world and how they interpret the world feels so far beyond the norm. But at some point, it is them expressing their humanness just in a way that may not be typical. Um, if you really feel that formal testing is what you're looking for, I recommend you talk with somebody, talk with a professional, talk with somebody at our center or somebody else that is knowledgeable in the world of gifted. But if they're saying, "Oh yeah, you should see how smart your kid is. Go get testing to see, how brilliant they are." No, because the testing process itself has to be appropriate as well. Some kids aren't ready to be tested. Some kids aren't ready to go through that process. And some parents aren't ready to go through that process without somebody guiding them and walking them through what they need to do with it. Too many parents have gone, they've gotten testing, they've walked away with, "Oh yeah, your kid's, elevated in these areas and they're probably gifted. And yeah, their processing's a little low, but it's in the normal range. So don't worry too much about it." And then that's just all they get. And what are you supposed to do with that? You take that to the school and the school comes back with you and says, "Well, they're doing fine, so I don't see any issues." But yes, we'll definitely keep an eye out for the giftedness as they kind of chuckle to themselves because they think it's just another parent walking in who believes their child is, above and beyond compared to most. I don't want you going through that experience. I don't want you being invalidated if you're picking up on something where there's probably more that needs to be sussed out. I hope that's making sense, right? And for you, Stephanie, out there, again, if I were to talk to you face to face, I'd want to know more information. What are you concerned about? Where's the pain live for you in what you're seeing with your kid? And what is it that you're confused about that testing would help illuminate and make more sense of? And then, yes, maybe that's where we go from there. Um, but I don't believe that every single person who has a kid that is out there, not in the norm, or is showing some ability in reading or writing or their verbal precocity, that they need to go get testing. It needs to be assessed for. It needs to be evaluated if that's an appropriate thing. But at the same time, yeah, there are things that you can look at where, that would tell you that there's some level of giftedness going on. And so, yes, you got meltdowns, you have a high level of alertness, or they just seem to be, observant all the time. Or they're struggling with things that feel, they should be able to do age appropriate wise. Um, but we're just looking at that child's development and how it's growing or not growing, and where there are extremes and where there are areas that are vulnerable that need to be supported and understood. We are always looking at the whole child, and we always want to put a child's behavior into an appropriate context. I've used the example of, oh, my child's lying all the time, or they're telling, big lies. And, every time we dig a little deeper, there's a lot of reasons that go into what the quote unquote lying is about. For some kids, it's they have, terrible auditory processing or language processing, and they literally don't remember what you told them or what they told you. And so it comes back out later as, you never told me that, or you never said that. And it feels like they're lying, but possibly it's a processing issue. Or some kids, struggle to see the big picture. They get hung up on a detail and they focus on that detail. And so it makes sense in their head. I'll give you an example. My friends had a chat with their kids about moving under certain circumstances that were going on in the country. And they said, if this happens, we might be moving to Denmark. And the child, saw these circumstances were happening, though not in the same context that the parents presented it, and went to every kid in the school and said, yeah, I'm going to be moving soon. I'm going to miss you guys. Yeah, we're moving. And the parents are like, what? What are you saying? We're not moving. We're not going anywhere. But somewhere into that kid's head, they made sense of the data that, they thought was important. And to them, it felt real. And so they started to, pull the trigger on this is happening, right? That kid isn't lying. They're not attention seeking necessarily, but they are, not processing everything. And that's more of, still related to giftedness, but not necessarily, pathology or negative behavior. And again, let's take this one step further where maybe your child is doing attention seeking behavior. And it's kind of like, oh my gosh, they're just trying to, pull everything onto them and have all eyes on them. That may be a need that kid has. I always tell parents, kids might need attention and they're trying to get it any way they can. And maybe that's okay. Maybe we do give in to the attention and focus more on them because maybe they need something that they're not even aware of, or they're struggling with something that they have zero awareness of, but they're trying to reconcile that by attention seeking behavior. And we don't dismiss that or, say that they just need to knock it off, right? We're always looking with a comprehensive lens, an evaluative lens, and looking at all the pieces of the puzzle together, because most, if not all, behavior has some function to it that makes sense. And but when we really feel stuck, we really feel like we don't understand the function of this behavior and it's creating problems for the child and family and school, and we're really struggling and we're really in pain, yeah, guess what? We're probably looking at testing on some level for somebody that really understands gifted children and what a real full neuropsych profile needs to look like so that we can start making sense of things. So I hope that answers your question, Stephanie, and hopefully that was helpful to other listeners out there. But please feel free to send more questions in. I love answering anything that I can. I will do it to the best of my ability. Always remember that if you share personal details in your questions and stories, I may not put that in there. I need to protect your privacy and your own vulnerability. But if you give me the gist of what you're looking for, I'd be sure to answer it to the best of my ability. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Hopelessly Gifted podcast. Thank you, and bye-bye.